Okay, so vamos a empezar
Good.
vamos a empezar a grabar después de la junta. Si tienen alguna pregunta, deténganse hasta el último y ya podemos contestarle cualquier pregunta que ocupen o tengan.
Okay, and you guys can see my screen, right, Miss LaFleur?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, all right. So we're going to go through a couple data points first. I know many of you will probably hear about some of the COVID numbers and protocols and updates. We'll get to those in a moment. But first, I want to go over some celebrations and some of the things we talked about with kids this morning.
Hola, que ese es el principal Mr. DeFletch. Está tratando de dar la información en lo que estamos haciendo este año y quiere darles un aplauso a todos los estudiantes de todos los logros que han tenido el semestre anterior.
So first, I am going to play this video. I'm going to turn off the sound because you can probably see it. But we showed kids this video this morning. So we wanted to show them that life is always going to have obstacles that are trying to knock you down and prevent you from progressing and growing. And we've got to just get back up and just keep moving forward. We've got to have that perseverance. And that's something right now we want to highlight, is that perseverance is an extreme asset in today's world.
Okay. Este video es un video que se les enseñó a los estudiantes hoy en la mañana, dándoles saber y dándoles el apoyo que la vida da muchos obstáculos y necesitamos seguir dándole, aunque tengamos todos estos obstáculos.
So as part of that, we outlined a few things that we see as core mindsets for this semester, for us just to get through, not just safely, but to be in that same bucket where we're not just surviving, we're thriving. Because one thing we did notice, and you'll see this in the data in a moment, is that high school, we really rebounded and came back this first semester thriving in our growth.
Dice que quiere darles saber que en este semestre regresamos para atrás más fuertes y eso es un logro que hicimos en la preparatoria y es un logro que hemos tratado de enseñarle a los estudiantes y enseñarles a los papás.
So we think about what are the things we want our kids and families to be talking about and thinking about as we go through semester 2. Ms. Jill, I'm going to go one by one with these.
Okay.
The first is, we all are seeking something extraordinary. We're doing things that haven't been done before and getting our kids opportunities that maybe in other places in the world, in the country, they don't get. So above that, we look at what's normal and we go, here's our bar. Let's shoot even higher than that. Let's be more.
Okay, so la primera cosa que les quiero enseñar a los estudiantes es que empiecen a mirar lo extraordinario que podemos hacer. Podemos tener algo normal y podemos lograr algo más fuerte o más grande.
Next, we know in B is what we also just talked about, is that in adults, students that are on here, everybody, challenges are just a part of life. And every challenge that comes along, we can't get into a worry spiral. We can't let them prevent us from getting to where we can go and the opportunities we should have. So one thing is, we need to persist. We need to see challenges and go that I have help, I have resources, and I have the knowledge and skills to navigate these challenges together. So we persist.
La segunda es, si uno tiene algún obstáculo donde no puede hacer las cosas, puede mirar a todos los logros o todos los archivos que podemos darle. Por ejemplo, le dice que tenemos tutoría, tenemos el apoyo de diferentes consejeros, maestros y principales, y esos son los que queremos ofrecerle a los estudiantes.
And next, we look at, we're embracing improvement and growth. And improvement is not always easy, and it's not always positive. There are going to be setbacks. There are going to be things that are hurdles, but we embrace that. Likewise, we don't get comfortable. We don't say, this is working for now, so I'm just going to stop growing. I'm going to stop improving. We say, how do we grow more? How do we improve more? And for us as staff members, that means, how do we do more for you, our families in this community?
La C es cómo queremos enseñarle a los estudiantes y a los papás cómo podemos apoyarlos como como principales y como educadores aquí en la escuela. So, si tienen un obstáculo, queremos enseñarle o apoyarlos a que no se queden en medio, sigan adelante y consigan más de los logros que podemos hacer con los estudiantes.
We know that failing is only impactful to us when we choose not to try. So if we are trying and we have a setback, that is not failure. That's growth. That's improvement. The only true failure is when we choose not to try. And that's with everything, all of our COVID mitigations, homework, coming in, every little thing. The only way we can say it's a failure is if we don't try.
So para un obstáculo quiere ver que algo se trate de hacer. No quiere que un estudiante venga a la escuela y diga, no pude, no pude. Tiene que hacer todo su intento a no decir no puedo, hacer todos los obstáculos y completar el obstáculo para que complete lo que no cree que pueda hacer.
Next, we are always going to do what is difficult if it is what is right. We are not going to choose the easy road just because it is easier to do. If we see something that's based upon research, based upon science, based upon experts, that this is the right thing to be doing, and everyone goes, well, that's going to be tough, you can't do that. We're going to say, let us show you how. We're going to do what is right, even if it is difficult.
So le da una muestra. Si algo es difícil, no vamos a tomar la ruta fácil. Vamos a tratar de darles el apoyo para que haga todo lo posible para que la dificultad no la tenga y pueda lograr lo que se le está dando de meta.
Next, we are passionate. We're passionate about kids. We're passionate about each other. Our kids are passionate about learning. They're passionate about their friends and their family. In this community, we are passionate about what we do, and we constantly embrace those opportunities and are excited about them.
Somos pasionantes en todo lo que hacemos con los estudiantes y tratamos de empujarlos, tratamos de enseñarles qué son nuestros logros y que pueden hacer todo lo que se necesita hacer para llegar al nuevo nivel.
And likewise for G, we know looking back that there are going to be challenges, as we stated before. But when there's challenges, we know that all of us, and adults included, we need to ask for help. We need to know that when we're struggling, that others out there might have answers and support that we don't have. And so we need to use those systems to ask for help. And likewise, whenever we see others struggling, we need to do our best to help them. I gave them that metaphor again, that if we're in the wolf pack, we need to constantly look back and see which of our wolves have stopped, which of them have laid down, which of them are hobbling along, and we need to take care of them and get them back into the pack.
Okay. So en la G les está ofreciendo asistente a todos los estudiantes. Les dice que como los lobos tenemos que seguir igual en el mismo nivel, que sigan mirando para atrás y si algún estudiante o algún otro necesita apoyo, que les dé el apoyo para ayudarles a seguir el nivel de los lobos, que sigan al corriente.
And next, integrity is essential, right? We don't do things because people are watching us. We do them because they're the right thing to do. And so with that, even when nobody's looking, we're all going to do the right thing. And we saw such amazing evidence of that today on campus.
So les da otra muestra que cuando alguien esté mirando mal o haga algo malo, que trate de decir para que todos nos podamos llegar al mismo nivel y lleguemos a donde tenemos que llegar.
And I will share that with parents. Out of the hundreds of kids on campus today, Miss LaFleur and I walked around every break. We checked every classroom multiple times. And throughout the day, we only had 4 students that needed reminders about their masks. Other than that, every student was wearing their mask 100% correctly all of the time. And that is amazing on this first day back.
So, el principal y la asistente de principal dieron vueltas alrededor de la escuela y alrededor de las clases y nomás 4 estudiantes necesitaban recordatorios, que necesitaban ponerse las máscaras. So ese es un aceptamiento muy agradable de saber.
Okay, next I'm going to review some data points and then we're going to jump into some of the COVID protocols. The first one, awesome. We talked about rapid guessing a lot in semester 1. This is how often kids skip a question. Our math in August was at 596 questions skipped. When we took it again in December, where we had even more kids test, we ended with only 108 questions skipped. That means y'all helped bring down over 400 questions that were originally skipped on the math test. That's amazing in that turnaround. So thank you, families and students.
So en esta data dice que en el gobierno había 596 preguntas que nomás le atinaron. Ahora en el invierno se volvió a tomar la misma prueba y nomás se cambiaron 108. Sus 108 estudiantes o preguntas fueron al guess o no le atinaron, no fueron, nomás era atinación.
Thank you, Miss Julie. All right, so I want to look at growth in MAP on the math section real quick. And I want to remind everybody, the RIT score is how many grew the points they got on the test, right? That's how did I do on the test. And the percentile over here is how you grew comparison to other students. I'll pause there, Miss Julie.
Okay, so en esta hoja está diciendo cuántos estudiantes agarraron y qué por ciento agarraron en ese nivel.
So over here, 9th grade on math, we had 127 kids grew at least 1 point on their test. And that means over 74% of 9th graders grew at least 1 point on their test. So not only did they maintain, but they grew at least a little bit.
So del grado 9 dice aquí en la hoja que 127 estudiantes ganaron 1 punto a adelantarse. So era un porcentaje de 74.27%.
So special shout out to 9th graders because they had the highest amount of students grow at least 1 RIT point on the MAP test in the winter. Great job, 9th grade on that.
So muchas felicidades a todos los del grado 9. Se subieron un porcentaje y fueron los que agarraron más porcentaje en subir el nivel. Felicidades.
Looking at that totals, we're at 71.11% of all tested students grew at least 1 RIT point. That means that almost 3 out of every 4 kids on campus is experiencing success in math, and that is phenomenal.
So en el estudio de matemáticas subieron 71.1%, quiere decir de 3 estudiantes subieron 1 punto de 4. Eso es muy bien y es un avance muy grande para nosotros.
Now, you may look at the percentile and go, whoa, wait a second, why is it lower? Well, the percentile gets harder because each time you take it, it moves a little bit because other students are moving up across the nation. So while our students grew on their own score, they might not have grown always in comparison with others in that grade level. That's okay because we have enough momentum that this is going to follow suit with our individual student scores.
So usted a lo mejor está diciendo que porque el porcentaje no subió, el porcentaje de la mano izquierda es de los estudiantes que están tomando esa prueba durante todo California. So a lo mejor no cree que hay mucho avance, pero en nuestro nivel es bueno porque están subiendo los estudiantes y es lo que más queremos ver.
All right, for reading, similar chart here. I'm going to jump down and shout out 11th grade parents, families. Again, amazing across the board, but definitely want to shout out 11th grade on the reading portion. 75.16% of all students grew at least 1 RIT point on the test. Excellent job, 11th graders. Sorry, I misspoke there. 11th graders, but across the board, all were above 70, which is truly amazing.
So esta es la de lectura. Dice que todos los estudiantes subieron a 70%, pero les quiere dar una porra a todos los estudiantes del grado 11 porque subieron a 75.16%. So cada estudiante subió un nivel. Y es muy importante darles todas las porras a todos esos estudiantes. Muchas gracias.
Now, you might look at us and say, well, growing 1 point isn't that great, right? Well, it actually is. But on top of that, I want to show you how far some of our kids are growing and how fast.
So dice que a lo mejor usted dice que 1 punto no es mucho, pero quiere enseñarle otra estrategia donde usted puede ver qué tan rápido está el estudiante moviéndose y qué tan orgulloso está de ellos.
So in the middle here, we have 27 students on the math test maintain their score, and 16 students maintain their ELA score.
So, en la página donde mira que está en 0, están todos los porcentajes, todos los números de los estudiantes. El total es 27 en matemáticas y en escrita es 16.
On the left, we have the number of students who dropped or their score went down. And on the right, we have the amount of the number of students who went up. And in a minute, I'm going to tell you why these numbers are exciting.
So, en la mano derecha dice que los estudiantes que bajaron y en la mano izquierda son los estudiantes que subieron los niveles. Y ahorita le va a decir por qué.
The average growth for the nation for the year is between 7 and 8 RIT points. That's important because if you look here, you can see how many kids already in half a year are on track for that.
So, dice que en el nivel, dice que hay muchos estudiantes que suben por lo menos 7%. Y ahorita dice aquí que los estudiantes están subiendo en nomás a mediados de la escuela.
So for math, we have 122 students, and for ELA, 106 students who grew between 1 and 5 points, which means they are on track to reach that yearly total, which is the average in the nation. That itself is huge, but just wait.
So dice aquí que el nivel es 122 para matemáticas y 106 para leer. So dice el principal que esos son más de 3 puntos que están subiendo los estudiantes y nomás es a mitad del año.
For many students in this middle column, they not only have already reached this year's growth average of RIT, but many of them have gone above and beyond and have grown into next year. So they've grown like a year and a half already academically by winter, which is amazing. So look at these numbers that 103 and 82 already grew as much as expected for a normal calendar year, and they're already into a year and a half to 2 years of growth.
So dice que los números aquí para matemáticas son 103 y para escritura están a 82. Eso quiere decir que todos esos estudiantes ya están creciendo por lo menos un año avanzado de lo regular. Ahorita están a mitad del año.
Over on the right, this is the one I'm most excited about. This group here, the group of students who grew 11 or more RIT points, 77 in math, 114 in ELA. You're talking that in just this first semester, they've grown almost 3 or more years in each of those subjects in just this one semester. So now you think about if we take that and think about if we do that with our freshmen and keep doing that every semester, how much further ahead of every school in this nation will be if we stick to what we are doing best.
Dice que ahorita hay 77 estudiantes que han crecido más de 11 puntos en matemática y en leer 114. Eso imagínense, si seguimos haciendo este proceso a los estudiantes del grado 9, para cuando gradúen van a tener más avanzamiento con lo que estamos haciendo aquí en esta escuela.
And so last point before I move on, and I'm just so excited about this, is that this isn't just students growing, this is accelerated growth. We are growing students more than one calendar year within just half a year. And that's a trajectory we want to stay on because that's going to help put all of our families and our students at the top when it comes to opportunities for colleges and careers.
So dice que es lo más importante que estamos teniendo. Si todos estos estudiantes están creciendo 11 puntos, entonces imagínense cuando lleguen a su último año de escuela, entonces podemos darles más ofrecimiento para los colegios. Estamos muy orgullosos de todos los niveles que estamos haciendo.
All right, so a couple other key reminders. First, all grade levels will be getting some students in Plato this year. Before, we only put seniors in Plato courses. But now, if a student earned a D or an F and they're on A through G track, they will be assigned a Plato course by the end of January. Please look for letters and communication on Parent Square around Plato access for your child if they got a D or an F in this first semester.
So, estamos ofreciendo otra clase que se llama Play-Doh y es para los estudiantes que fallaron o agarraron una D en una de sus clases. Regularmente se lo ofrecen a los estudiantes que son sus últimos años de la preparatoria, pero ahora les vamos a avanzar y vamos a tratar de ofrecerlos a los estudiantes que agarraron una D o una F en una de sus clases. So, trate de agarrar esa información en el Parent Square.
Also, I want to remind everybody, we have 3 big intervention pieces. I want to remind everybody, and they'll be starting later in January. One, we will be offering Play-Doh Night School again at nights, Monday through Thursday. So look out for information to have your child sign on and get support from a teacher on Play-Doh. We will offer weekend math camps for those that have maybe a little bit larger of a challenge to close for their math. And we'll communicate that out by the end of January. And finally, we have an interventionist on site who is pulling students with lower fluency levels and is practicing reading with them to help bring up their fluency levels. We did this largely with 9th graders in the fall, and we're going to continue in the spring.
So dice que vamos a ofrecer tres diferentes opciones. La clase de Play-Doh se va a ofrecer en las noches, una clase de matemáticas en los fines de semana y vamos a detener a los estudiantes que tienen problemas en el aprendizaje al inglés, donde un maestro los va a jalar de sus clases para darle más instrucciones en cómo avanzarse en conocer más el inglés.
All right, so let's talk about what matters most and is at the front of everybody's mind right now. I want to be very clear that in becoming an educator, I became an educator because I care deeply about kids and families. There is nothing more important to me than the safety of our children and our community members. And so there is nothing else I'm doing right now besides watching numbers, talking with experts, sitting in meetings before school, after school, on weekends to make sure that we're doing the best to make the best decision possible within legal guidelines to make sure our family and our community stays safe while on this trajectory of growth that we are on.
So dice el principal que como lobos se juntan todos y es porque se hizo un maestro, para estar segura que todos nuestros estudiantes estén seguros, están metiéndose en juntas al principio de la escuela, después de la escuela o durante los fines de semana para estar seguro que nuestros estudiantes estén seguros donde están y que estén más a salvos aquí en la escuela.
Miss Julie, Miss Flor, myself, we all have children. When we come to work and your kids are on campus, they are our kids. That's how we look at them. That's how we care for them. That's how we love them. And that's how we support them. And so I want you to know that this isn't a job to us. This is a calling, and we're here for your children while they're on campus.
Dice el principal que él, como la asistente del principal y como yo, todos tenemos hijos en nuestras casas y cuando venimos a la escuela, tratamos a sus estudiantes como si fueran de nosotros, como si fueran nuestros hijos. So, queremos asegurarlos que ustedes que estén a gustos ahorita donde están, que los estudiantes estén salvos y sanos aquí donde están.
All right, so first, Omicron's here. That's where we are. There's no, sugarcoating that's the way that things are at this point. So the best thing is, how do we go forward, keeping everybody as safe as possible, looking at the numbers and how things are moving?
Dice que ahorita los números del estado están subiendo y estamos tratando de hacerlos más estables aquí en la escuela.
Now, our leadership team, we meet daily, if not 2 to 3 times a day. That goes with our own internal team with health experts. That goes with partnering with TWC and the wonderful company who gives us access to Dr. Larry Wolk, who's an infectious disease expert in his past, as well as meeting with CDPH and other state leaders with the access we have to make sure we have the best data available and the most informed decision.
Dice que toda la información que tenemos diario es por los del estado, los de la clínica que tenemos, nuestro equipo más avanzado que nosotros para darnos todos los números y porcentajes de todo lo que necesitamos saber por el COVID.
So some of you asked about how we're looking at the numbers and how we're doing that. So I'm going to kind of just take you very quickly through some of the numbers and how we look at them and what we're doing at that process.
So muchos de ustedes están preguntando en cómo avanzamos a los niveles y a los números, y le va a decir, este gráfico le va a decir cómo estamos mirando todos esos números.
So I didn't put this in here, but the highest level, we have people that are tracking and getting information about variants across the globe. And we watch those pop up in other countries to see their potential spread over to the United States.
So, hay un número donde él no puso, pero es un número más avanzado donde le está dando la información de todos los diferentes estados y los diferentes condados donde le están dando los números.
For instance, I'll give you one that this morning and yesterday we were talking with some people about one in France. Very limited amount of people, but it is a newer identified variant. So that is being tracked and followed by our operations team.
So dice que le va a dar un ejemplo. En francés están dando otro número de otra infección, pero el número es muy delgadito y por eso no lo puso.
Next, we look at the United States as a country as a whole. So we can really dig in and see where the origin is, how fast and quickly things spread, because now we have a database where we can start to predict where certain trends are hitting different states at different periods for this. And so we have been following Omicron since it really first broke on the East Coast around New York and New Jersey, and how that spread through Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Virginia, Ohio, and then up into the Northeast, which have some of the more higher numbers right now in terms of the percentage differences of their population.
So el porcentaje donde está sacando es de todo el Estados Unidos. El número donde están avanzados es donde empezó, que es por Nueva York, por esa área de allí de ese lado, donde están sacando los porcentajes más altos.
Then we look at our specific state and county and then city at that point next.
So en este punto empezamos a ver a California, nuestro condado y nuestro estado.
And so right now with Omicron, it looks to be like for the majority of the peak, we're running about 2 to 3 to almost 4 weeks behind the East Coast hitting their specific surge.
So, en nuestro porcentaje se está avanzando de 3% menos de donde estaba al principio, que es Nueva York en ese lado.
Now, that being said, we know that moving forward, looking at these other states, in the schools, the areas, and the towns that really impose and follow the basic 3 guidelines, they are able to mitigate larger outbreaks or community spread outbreaks across that board.
So estamos tratando de agarrar los números más bajos por donde estaban los más altos. So de allí nos estamos avanzando.
And so first thing I want to talk about is just the renewal towards social distancing. Social distancing is an important aspect. It is not the most important aspect of it, but social distancing is that first aspect that we want to work towards, in that we need to make sure that we are distanced out as possible so that we're not in heavily concentrated areas that have particles of COVID in them.
So nuestra primera lección que estamos tratando de enseñarles a los estudiantes es que traten de estar por lo menos 6 pies de uno al otro, donde no lo estamos tratando de tratar de ayudar a prevenir.
I will tell you that from our walks on campus and classrooms, amazing social distancing happening. Kids are keeping their distance. Even when they're in groups, they're staying spread out a little bit more. During breaks on campus, we're seeing a little bit more social distancing. If there's one ask we can make of parents to talk about with their children at home, it is social distancing during lunch. They want to talk during lunch, we see still. They want to see their friends during lunch still, but we need to make sure that we're still distancing out, especially because the masks are off every once in a while when they're chewing and eating. So we just want to, if you can, any additional talks with kids would be helpful around lunch.
So dice que él como caminó alrededor de la escuela y alrededor de las clases está mirando que todos los estudiantes están quedando separados más tiempo. Nomás estamos tratando de apoyarlos durante el lonche cuando se están comiendo y están alrededor de uno al otro. Por favor, déjenles saber que trate de estar más alejado de uno al otro.
All right, now we know that the basic three, we talked about distancing. The basic three are what keeps everybody safe through COVID. Regardless of the variant, these three are essential to making sure that we all stay safe and stay on track for what we're doing here at the school.
So, aparte de la distancia, estos son los tres cosas que estamos tratando de ayudar y apoyar a los estudiantes que hagan para que estén más prevenidos del COVID.
So first off, we are only right now, and again, CDPH is probably looking at new guidelines from the call I just got off on, that surgical N95, KN95 are the only masks that are approved for right now. So face shields with the drape cloths, no longer approved. Cloth masks, no longer approved. Gator, no longer approved. If you put them all on in sequence, you can feel the difference in the amount of air that can go through in and out of a sequence. And with this, we just know that surgical and N95 masks are able to filter and prevent the spread of the size of particles in its amount that comes from COVID.
So, las máscaras que estamos aprobando son las máscaras que son para las cirugías y las que son N95. Esas son las más. Las que ya no estamos aprobando son las máscaras que son de tela o que son nomás para enfrente, para apoyarlos. Esos ya no los estamos aprobando porque el CDC dice que estas no están cubriendo todos los partículas del COVID que están tirando.
Now, over here on the chart, I want to point out that I'm going to point out the painfully obvious. If we all stay home, isolated, yes, it is the safest from COVID. But what we saw was an escalation of social, emotional issues with students, with learning deficiencies, those gaps spread from looking at abuse of addiction or medicine use, vaping, all of these things increase. So it is safest to stay at home from COVID. But what we saw is there were other factors that increased in their use at home. That really makes it that, like, yes, being home is safe from COVID, but there's other things that can impact a teenager by staying home at long periods of time.
So dice que sí, lo más seguro es de estar en su casa sin tener, sin estar alrededor de otros estudiantes. Sí, pero al mismo tiempo tiene que mirar que los estudiantes estaban bajando de sus grados, estaban teniendo mucha depresión, estaban teniendo diferentes causas o diferentes maneras de usar por la depresión.
Now, our goal is to live in this low, very low box right here, is that we know that even if both people happen to have COVID and are asymptomatic, if everybody's wearing their mask when they're supposed to be wearing their mask, and they're distanced when they're supposed to be or able to be distanced, and sanitize their hand often throughout the day, wash their hands, then we know that there is low to very low risk of this spreading.
Dice que nuestro gol es que estén los estudiantes aquí en el amarillo, en el verde. So, hemos mirado de que si los estudiantes están separados de uno al otro o se están limpiando las manos o están usando sus máscaras a diario, entonces podemos continuar con esos niveles.
One of the things I do want to talk about, and this is specific around some of the student responses we get, is that symptomatic means that you have symptoms, right? You have the fever, you're sneezing, you're coughing, anything from that list. Asymptomatic means you have COVID in your system, but you are not showing any symptoms. What they have found out is that a symptomatic person puts as much COVID-19 out into the air around them as an asymptomatic person. So sometimes kids want to say, well, I feel great. I don't have a fever. I must be fine. Well, that might not be the case, because by that point where you start to have symptoms, you have already started to put COVID out to the area around you, which is why, regardless of how you're feeling, we've got to keep that mask on and the appropriate mask type on.
Okay, so ahorita dice que hay dos diferentes síntomas. Hay un estudiante que pueda tener todos los síntomas, fiebre, tos y gripa, y puede estar tirándolo, y hay otro estudiante o otra persona que no está teniendo ningún síntoma y por no tenerlo no se está poniendo la máscara. So, por eso es lo más recomendable que siempre tenga la máscara, porque hay dos diferentes de tipos que puedan estar dando el COVID.
The next thing is some students say or have said in semester one, like I had COVID before. And so they're not as strict with their mask. And so we are starting this year being very strict in this new year, halfway through, to really making sure students understand all of the risks involved to themselves and to others. And one is that COVID-19 reinfection has happened. Just because you got it once does not mean you can't get it again. And it doesn't mean it's going to be any easier the second time around, because it might be a different variant or different strain for those.
Dice que ahorita muchos estudiantes están diciendo, ya agarré el COVID, ya no necesito cuidarme tanto. Ahorita estamos a otro nivel del COVID y es donde deberemos de tener la máscara más puesta, más seguido para prevenir todos esos. Y aunque lo tenga el COVID una vez, puede volver a tenerlo otra vez. Y es lo que la más información que les estamos dando a los estudiantes para que sepan todo eso.
Again, the only masks allowed are the surgical masks or the KN or N95 masks.
So, estas son las máscaras que estamos aprobando y estas son las únicas máscaras que los estudiantes tienen que tener.
I will tell you today, we had 0 issues with students having a mask on their face.
Dice que un ejemplo, ahora el día de ahora había 0 estudiantes que no tenían sus máscaras puestas. Todos llegaron con una máscara.
The one area that we have where I said we had to address 4 students was around having their nose covered. And so it's really about us renorming with our students that if we all have our mask on and it's above our nose and below our chin, we are safe to be around each other.
So, los 4 estudiantes que le tuvieron que recordar que se pusieran la máscara es porque la nariz la tenían afuera. Esos son los estudiantes que tenemos que volver a ponerlos a que se pongan la máscara completamente de la nariz al pescuezo.
Now, with that being said, you see in this green box over here, we have directed all staff to start observing and addressing this every moment of the day. Safety is paramount right now to our school and our families and our community. So with that, you may be receiving calls from us about your student wearing or not wearing a mask so that we can make sure that the community at large is safe.
So, esta caja que está aquí en la verde es recordándole a todos los maestros, todos los que trabajan aquí, para recordarle a los estudiantes que se pongan las máscaras diario, que las tengan puestas diario, y si por alguna razón el estudiante no está haciendo caso, no nos está respetando, entonces vamos a empezar a mandar mensajes o llamadas a su casa para que usted les vuelva a recordar a todos los estudiantes.
So some key reminders. One, we have directed all students just to take home their Chromebooks and all the books they have daily. I know we don't have lockers here, but just in case they found a favorite teacher to store their book overnight, we just want to make sure that in case in the future there ever is a moment where things switch to remote, again, there's nothing impending right now this week on that. If it ever happens, we want to make sure our students have everything they need at home, Chromebook, charger, and all of their books.
Entonces, les está recomendando a todos los estudiantes que se lleven todos la computadora, todos sus libros o sus cargadores para su casa y los regrese todos los días. No es que vaya a pasar algo, pero nomás es un recordatorio que quiere que todos los estudiantes carguen todas sus cosas para su casa y para atrás a la escuela todos los días.
Number 2, we saw last year, especially during remote learning, and then when several students tried to come back, the number of missing assignments you had mattered a lot. So what we're pushing on families to do, and especially our students, is to keep their missing assignments low in case something happens over the next few weeks where a virtual remote situation would happen, because that means they're in a good place for that transition in and out of remote learning. If they go into it with a large amount of missing assignments, it could be very difficult for them to stay on track or bounce back from that.
Otro recordatorio que les quiere enseñar o poner a los estudiantes es que trate de tener lo más mínimo de tareas o a cualquier tarea o cualquier assignment que se le esté dando al estudiante, que los pongan a los menos que puedan, porque cuando sí o en caso de que tengamos que estar en nuestras casas, ese fue lo más difícil que los estudiantes tenían. Las tareas de volverlas a tomar y volverlas a hacer fue lo más difícil en tener.
For number 3, again, just a reminder for families, and we made sure that students are aware of this again. If the student or anyone in the household is experiencing symptoms, is waiting for a COVID test that they took or tested positive, that student or parent should call the COVID hotline immediately and make them aware of that. And then they will guide on next steps, whether they want the student to test or let you know when the student can return back to campus. That step is really important for all of us at home to make sure we're following, because that will make sure all of us stay even more safe by limiting the amount of people on campus that have symptoms.
Okay. Si por alguna razón un estudiante está teniendo síntomas, está esperando, alguien en su casa está esperando una prueba o ha salido positivo, si por favor nos puede llamar al número del COVID hotline en ese instante para prevenir cualquier más exposure o más estudiantes que tengan el COVID.
And lastly, I'm going to say it again. It's probably going to come out of my mouth 4,000 more times by the end of the day tomorrow. We're following the safe 3. That's mask up, wearing appropriately, hand sanitizing and washing, and distancing as available. Those things mitigate appropriately.
So, el número 4 que está requiriendo son usar la máscara, usar sanitizador y la distancia. Esos son los 3 expectaciones que tenemos con todos los estudiantes.
And lastly, we asked our high school students to be the role model for all other students in this district, so that when the elementary students see their siblings, when the elementary students see that cool senior, when the middle schoolers in 7th grade see that 11th grader, that they go, that's the person I look up to, that they see them doing everything that they should be, the way they should be doing it, because that is transformative to a whole school community. And our kids can and should and will be role models for all the other kids on this campus.
Lo que estamos tratando de enseñarles a los estudiantes que sean alguien que los menores miren y puedan ser como un modelo para ellos. Eso es lo que les estamos tratando de enseñar para que ellos sean modelos para sus hermanitos más mayores o para uno de la secundaria donde mire a uno de la preparatoria y diga, mira, sí quiero ser como ellos, quiero ponerme mi máscara como debe de ser.